Okay,
That was not the case.
let's
He was lovely.
open today's meeting.
Yes, he was a cool intern there. I was glad that they brought him.
At 4:10. And Mose, would you take minutes because Tim's not here? Thank you. Also, has everybody had a chance to look at the last minutes and if they're acceptable with all their detail?
I think Deidre is spelled wrong.
Okay, we will correct Deirdre's name.
On the first page.
I don't have them right in front of me right now.
There's, I believe, Mary Ann, I think I left.
D-E-I-R, there's an R missing there, yeah. We will correct Deirdre's name, put the R in. Anything else? If not, I'll accept a motion to approve as corrected.
So move.
Okay, from Jay. And second by Jay, Ken and Jay. All right.
So I've got Jay as moving and Ken is seconding, is that correct, or I got it backwards?
Other way around. Oh, here's Tim, though.
Your day has just gotten better.
Next month.
Beautiful. No, it's okay. We just started.
I missed the joke.
Well, the joke is you're supposed to take minutes.
That would be clear.
And if you weren't here, then Mose had to take them.
So he was celebrating your arrival.
Pretty excited.
The question is, are you ready to take minutes?
Oh, really? Taking minutes? Yeah, I suppose I can try.
All right. We'll catch you up on where we're at till you can get set.
Okay.
We just approved the minutes, and this is really such a weird meeting today. And we have some announcements, and then we'll start with Abby Westbury is here to talk about a program that they have going in Brunswick.
Oh, you said we were doing announcements now, so you finished with the announcements then?
I didn't see any.
All right.
You're it.
All right, yeah, I'll just talk briefly. I have the little postcards if you hand them out. Going to sit. Sorry, Matt. Jane, I'll just sneak in between you two. Yeah, so I'm also on Brunswick's Sustainability Committee, which basically handles all of Brunswick's trash and its efforts to control trash and waste and those sorts of things. We kind of have been working on building out a resource in the community called the Sustainability Cafe, which is modeled off of the Repair Cafe, where people can come in and bring, broken devices or broken machines and stuff and get them repaired. The Sustainability Cafe is kind of like that, except people can come in if they have questions related to sustainability actions. So like getting heat pumps, getting solar, native landscaping strategies, waste, recycling, all of those sorts of things. It's basically just like you struggling there, Matt?
I thought there was two pieces in it that just glued together.
It's basically just a resource where people can kind of come and walk through the big and confusing world we have with all of these sustainability actions you can do these days. It was inspired by kind of me watching my own family try to update the house to be more renewable and more sustainable, and really struggling with how to do that, whether to get heat pumps first, whether to get solar first, whether to get EVs first, whether to just work on insulation first. So that kind of is the inspiration behind this resource, having a place people can come and just casually talk to someone who knows about these resources, how those resources might fit best into their lifestyle. So yeah, we're just kicking it off in Brunswick. The first meeting is going to be, I think, October 12th, but we're going to be holding them the second Saturday of every month at Curtis Memorial Library. I told Marianne about this project that I'm working on, and she asked me to come and tell you all about it, so I'd be happy to chat about, I don't know, extending it into some of Harpswell's resources or seeing if you all would like to start one of your own. The Curtis Memorial Library is also Harpswell's library, so it's going to be a resource people from Harpswell can also access. Yeah,
Great, thank you. And I think what went through my mind is we have been trying to figure out ways to expand our information service. And this idea of you're doing it, I'm thinking, we have libraries here too where we could do.
Well, but we also have access to Curtis
And we have
Memorial
Curtis,
Library
yeah.
as Harpswell residents.
Yeah. So, great idea, I think, and
Yeah.
I think we can talk more as we work this coming year.
Who's staffing it? If I come in with a question, who will be at the other side of the table or in the chair next to me? Is
Well,
it
it's probably going to be
you?
me for a while.
Okay.
I was gonna say, how many volunteers do you have? Are you the volunteer, or are there more, or?
No, we're cycling through the sustainability committee on in Brunswick, so I'm grateful for that. I'm not expert on some of these areas, and people on that committee are. But how it's going to be for the first 2 or 3 months is I'm going to be the one staffing it for 2 or 3 months, just to kind of get a vibe as to what common questions or concerns people have, because it's quite hard to train people before you actually know what the program is going to look like. So, yeah.
And would you be willing to share those questions with us, the questions that people come in?
Yep,
with, So
definitely.
that it can inform the outreach that we do?
Mhm.
Thank you.
And if it's successful too in the future, I'd be happy to train or work with members of this committee or members of Harpswell too to see if they'd want to be their own trainers.
Is it something that dovetails with the Conservation Commission? Is it-
A lot of different things.
I have put down like a native landscaping strategies, and native landscaping rewilding as being one area that people commonly ask questions about, because I know like erosion control and nature-based solutions are an issue of concern in most of these coastal communities we're in. So yeah, certainly some of those questions overlap with Conservation Commission's work too, but that's the same for most of this committee's work.
Yes.
It overlaps with the Conservation Commission.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
I think it's great. Good for you.
Yeah,
Yep.
and it's a nice card.
It is.
Yes, if any of you want to, put it on your fridge or something, and I'll be happily to chat if you show up the second Saturday of every month.
Great. Very good.
All right.
Thank you, and we'll be talking to you more about it, I'm sure.
Abby, is this part of your dissertation research?
No, this is just, they dragged me onto the committee and we all needed the project, and this was my project. Which I am excited about, because it's, a whole bunch of people have been telling me they want a resource like this.
We're curious, next month, to hear an update on how many people showed up and what the questions were.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
No, I've run 2 like little trial runs now at the Repaca days.
Oh.
And the questions have been all over the place, but a lot focused on the stuff you can get money to help you with.
Yeah.
So like the efficiency made rebates and
Right.
stuff.
I was gonna ask you that, are you able to refer people like to Efficiency Maine or other resources?
Yeah, but refer them to like the website and the
Yeah,
resources.
yeah.
I'm not,
No, that's what I
yeah,
mean.
put them in the pipeline to
Yeah.
get the money.
Very good.
Sorry. You'll have to do some work on your own to get the money.
Okay. Moving along. Matt, we have you here today, which is great. I'm glad we were able to hold it off for a little while. And, but anyhow, Matt also serves on the Harbor and Waterfront Committee. And Mose originally brought your questions to the group. So why don't I turn this over to Matt to give us a little background on what he wanted to talk about, which was offshore wind turbines. And we plan to maybe like a 15-minute presentation and then a few questions, because we're just kind of pressed for time for our agenda today, but I'm sure we'll talk more in the future about it.
Thanks, Marianne. As Marianne stated, I'm on the Harbor and Waterfront Committee, and this was brought to my attention at Mo's at one of our last meetings. He brought the action plan in and wanted us to look over it and stuff. And when I got to Strategy D, which was kind of referencing the working waterfront and stuff like that, originally Strategy D had, I can't remember the wording exactly. I see now it's been changed, but
Changed, yeah.
originally it said something about the commercial fisheries and the working waterfront getting their energy from renewable sources. And let me be the first to say I have nothing against renewable energy or green energy if done responsibly. Offshore wind is not being done responsibly. It is one of the, if not the biggest threat the working waterfront is facing in the Gulf of Maine right now. Through displacement, through pollution, and through habitat loss, offshore wind will basically eliminate commercial fishing in the Gulf of Maine over the long term. And there's multiple reasons for that, and there's multiple reasons to why offshore wind is bad. And I can go through all of those. The biggest reason being, I understand that climate change is happening. I'm not here to deny that. What I'm here to deny is that offshore wind is going to slow climate change. It's not. And that's directly, if you go into BOEM's environmental impact statement for Vineyard Wind, they come right out and say there will be no impact on climate change. There will be a negligible impact on the amount of CO2 that is released into the environment, in the fact that it will increase. So if offshore wind isn't going to slow climate change down, why are we doing it? Has been the question the fisheries have been asking for years now. We still haven't gotten that answer, but that's a discussion for another time. And there's multiple issues with offshore wind. The first being, when this process all started, I've been involved since the beginning. The state of Maine wanted to build a research array out in the Gulf of Maine, which was, we weren't keen on it, but we accepted it because we were told, we're going to build a research array, we're going to get some research, some baseline studies, and then the commercial siting will happen after that. Well, that has been accelerated now. And at this point, the commercial leases are going up for sale at the end of this month, October 29th. And we do not have an operational or anywhere near an operational research array at this point. So there is going to be no baseline studies that are done before we start the commercial leasing process. So it's very hard for any scientist or any scientific agency to compare the effects of offshore wind if there's no baseline to start with. So if there's no baseline to start with, it's hard to see what the effects, whether positive or negative, are going to be. And in NOAA's latest environmental impact statement on Vineyard Wind 2, they finally acknowledged some of the issues that fishermen have brought to the table. One of the biggest ones being the risk to whales. And I understand that that's been a contentious topic in the media as of late. We can discuss that at a different time, whether offshore wind affects whales or not. But what BOEM said in their latest environmental impact statement is they acknowledge that it will cause temporary or permanent deafness when the pile driving takes place. And if anybody knows anything about a whale, if it's deaf, it's dead. Because that's how they communicate, that's how they find food, that's how they mate. So if a whale can't hear, it's going to die eventually. But according to NOAA, there's no risk to deafening a whale. So that, it just doesn't pass the straight face test. And so you kind of ask yourself, well, wait a minute, why are they saying this? And that's when you start to look at the conflicts of interest. Woods Hole Oceanic Institute, the New England Aquarium, the Mystic Aquarium, the Environmental League of Massachusetts, the Center for Coastal Studies, the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, the Audubon Society, the Nature Conservancy, the World Wildlife Foundation, the International Fund for Animal Welfare and Whale Alert, the Massachusetts Department of Fisheries, the Mass Lobstermen Association, and Blue Planet have all taken millions of dollars from the wind industry. A lot of these organizations are the organizations that are putting out the studies that say there are no effect on these sea creatures. It's a direct conflict of interest. If you're being funded by the group that you're doing the study for, it's not a non-biased study at that point. And one prime example of that is Oxford University did a study in a controlled environment on electromagnetic fields in lobster larvae, haddock larvae, and cod larvae, and that they showed there are detrimental effects to these. Lobsters, for example, are 10 times more likely not to be able to swim and develop deformities when exposed to electromagnetic fields. We brought this up many times, so what did they do? BOEM commissioned the University of Rhode Island to do their own study, and they did. And somehow, their EMF didn't affect the lobsters. But again, that study was funded by BOEM, the agency that's in charge of siting offshore wind. And some of the detrimental things, the biggest detrimental thing to the environment that these are going to have, and I talked to Mose about this, are the way the power will work is because it has to travel so far, it's going to be direct current, high voltage direct current. The grid is alternating current. In order for it to be converted from direct current to alternating current, there has to be a substation. There will be a substation located somewhere in the Gulf of Maine, potentially off the coast of Harpswell here, that will pump 81,000 gallons of chlorinated water a day through it to cool the cables in the conversion from DC to AC. There are filters on the intake tubes, but those filters are not small enough to prevent larval uptake. So any microorganisms, whether it be photoplankton, zooplankton, lobster larvae, fish larvae, anything like that, BOEM comes out in their economic or their environmental impact statement and acknowledges that these things will die. Everything in the ocean starts as a microorganism and grows from there. So BOEM has come out and acknowledged that they're going to be killing these things at the rate of 81,000 gallons a day. You know, to kind of put it in perspective, I believe that's 225 Olympic swimming pools a day. And the water that's pumped back out is 90 degrees. So we're worried about the Gulf of Maine warming, but we're going to be pumping 81,000 gallons of 90-degree chlorinated seawater back into the Gulf of Maine. And then you have the heat that's generated from the cables to begin with. They've done studies over in Europe. And the cables run anywhere from 154 to 194 degrees Fahrenheit. And about 10 feet away from the cable, it warms that water column up about 5.4 degrees on average, is what they've found in Europe. Another problem that arises from these is they've found over in the North Sea is it changes currents. The Gulf of Maine is a gyre. It gets its cool water from Labrador. It comes down, it kind of makes a circle and goes out. When you start placing immovable objects, that current is going to change. And when that current changes, it changes migration routes. It changes settlement where these microorganisms settle in the Gulf of Maine and everything like that. And when you change this current, it usually they've found in the North Sea it creates sediment plumes. And when you create sediment plumes, you drastically decrease the amount of sunlight that can get down through the water column, thus slowing the growth of your algae and some of your microorganisms that are some of the largest carbon sequesters in the world we see today. In fact, I believe it was in the last year scientists discovered, I believe it was off of South America, some of the largest carbon sequesters that are known to man are found in the benthic habitat, which is the mud on the bottom of the ocean. And the offshore wind that they want to build off the coast of Maine is going to be floating platforms that will be attached to the bottom with 3 chains. Each link of the chain will be the size of the bed of a truck. And these will be moving up and down, side to side, as the tide, the waves, and everything goes, crushing everything underneath them. Whether it's lobsters, those small microorganisms that are carbon sequesters, or anything along those lines. And then, on top of that, we saw the unfortunate event off of Martha's Vineyard about a month ago. Before Vineyard Wind was even completed, they had a blade failure. And they lost a blade off of one of the turbines. That one blade is 114,000 pounds of PFAs. That's 114,000 pounds of PFAs that have now been released into the environment that we will never recover. All of them. We have recovered some of them, but not all of them. And the estimate right now in the industry is that 2,300 blades will break a year. So a lot of those do happen on land because most of the windmills we have are on land at this point. But as this installation is being ramped up, there are more and more blades that are going to continue to break out to sea. We saw that one in Vineyard Wind broke, and that was before we hadn't even gone through a winter yet. We hadn't gone through a hurricane season yet, and it's already failing. That should raise enormous alarms if it's not even operational and they haven't even seen the worst of the weather yet, and we're already seeing failures. That alone should be reason, and they did stop construction for a month, but now it has started again. And that kind of gets me to where Harpswell is involved here. The problem that we're going to run into we believe as fishermen is when they build this research array, the power is going to have to come to shore. As of right now, there's only 2 places in the state of Maine that can accept that much power. Maine Yankee or Wyman Station on Cousins Island. That's the only place that the grid is large enough to accept that large of amount of power. And we don't believe that it's gonna go to Maine Yankee. And I don't, this is just an opinion between me and other fishermen. But it's not gonna go to Maine Yankee because in order to go there, it's gotta go up the Sheepscot River. The Sheepscot River is a historic Atlantic salmon run. So odds are they're not going to be allowed to dredge the Sheepscot because of the nuclear waste that is outside of the old Maine Yankee station and the harm that will cause to the endangered Atlantic salmon. So that leaves Wyman Station. And if it's coming to Wyman Station, it's coming through the waters off of Bailey Island here, the cable. We've seen off of Block Island where the only operational wind farm is in operation right now. They're already reburying the cable because it became unburied in less than a year. So they tell us that they're going to bury the cable, but we've seen that it's not feasible. And that's down on Block Island where they don't have the rocky coast that we do here. That's a much more sandy, muddy bottom. There's what we call the edge of bottom out there, which is basically the edge of the continental shelf. And there's very few breaks in it. And whatever breaks there are lined with lobster traps, because that's where your lobsters kind of migrate down through into deeper water. And they're going to have to run these cables up through those breaks on the edge of bottom because they're not going to be able to horizontally drill through that granite. They've acknowledged that. And that's going to be major displacement for anybody. I'm not willing to set a metal lobster trap on top of 114,000 volts. And then you have the array itself. We're going to lose 20 square miles of fishing bottom. They tell us that we can fish in the array, but each turbine, there's going to be 12, will be connected with a cable, that's kind of floats in the mid-water column in between them. So you can't set a trap in between them. You're going to get snagged in the cable. And then there's the radar interference that these create. If you're fishing beyond these and the weather comes on and you have to traverse within the array, our radars do not work in them. They create too much radar interference. With the electric magnetic fields, just the large turbines spinning around, the echoes that we get off of the radar, I tried to print a picture, I couldn't get it. It's just a blob of mess. You can't tell what it is. So you're not even able to navigate through these. So that creates a safety risk, for the fishermen when we're out there. And the other alarming thing is Maine lobstermen recently, we lost a huge swath of area off the coast of Maine to a right whale closure. And the research array is abutting that closure. They touch. The turbines are going to be installed directly next to where we're told we can't lobster because we're a risk to whales because of our vertical lines. But yet these turbines that are going to be secured to the bottom with 12 times 3 is 40 or 36, there'll be 36 lines attaching them to bottom. Those don't pose a risk for some reason. And I'm sorry, but a whale does not know where the imaginary line is. It's not going to stay in that closure area. They go where the food is. They migrate where the females are. There's no rule of thumb where they have to stay. And that's kind of the gist of it. There's a lot more, but that kind of gives you an idea of some of the things that we're facing as the fishing industry. And that's kind of the reason I found this alarming is, Harpswell is a working waterfront community. We had the 3rd highest lobster landings in the state last year. And do you remember, Jay? Billy Ball Falkenham had a bill. I believe you were still a representative. LD 101. I think it was 2018. It was a bill to basically stop the cables from coming in through state waters. The towns of Stonington, Cutler, Vinyl Haven, and Rockland, the 4 of the top 5 lobster ports all came out in support of that bill. Harpswell, The other top 5 did not. We were the only town out of the top 5 that did not support that bill. Now, I have seen the town take some wonderful steps here in the last 6 months to year by adopting the working waterfront policy. I know I have a planning board meeting tomorrow, actually, where we're gonna be looking to add the definition of commercial fishing into the addendum. So I think just another way that the town can show that it supports the commercial fisheries is kind of standing behind us and saying, hey, look, we have no problem with green energy, but it needs to be done responsibly. And as of right now, it's not being done responsibly. And just to kind of go back and reiterate that point, that blade failure that happened down on Vineyard Wind, the way the process is supposed to work, and this is from BOEM as well, is these companies are supposed to have to put the decommissioning or the cleanup fee up front before it's happened. The Biden administration waived that fee for Vineyard Wind. There's no money to clean up the mess. So, and that's happened for Sunrise Wind as well, which is the next wind farm that's being installed off of Massachusetts. And so it's starting to set a pattern that these decommissioning fees are being waived, and then we're running into problems and the money's not there to fix said problem. Questions?
Did you see the article in the Portland Press Herald yesterday by I think he was the executive director of the Audubon Society?
No, I did not.
He was praising and extolling the value and benefit of this offshore wind business. And when you mentioned that Audubon was one of those companies that are,
You give me just a second here.
I didn't have that connection at the time, but he was just saying how wonderful this whole concept was and how much we badly needed it. And yet, I knew you were gonna be talking about some of this. I meant to send that to you if I could get it out of them.
The only green thing about this is the money that's lining people's pockets, unfortunately. And I mean, I'll use dams as an example. Dams, hydroelectric, you would think would be green energy. It's renewable, the water always flows. Well, when you were in the legislature, the main legislator took dams out of the green energy portfolio. They're not deemed green energy anymore. And 100 years ago when we first started installing dams, that was the end-all be-all. That was the greatest thing we had going. It was going to save the planet. Well, now we found that hampers fish migration and slowed the Atlantic salmon. And we can't rip dams out fast enough now. The same thing's going to happen with offshore wind, is what we're afraid of. We don't have the research. We don't have the baseline to find out the positive and negative effects yet. And we're rushing this through without knowing them. And to think that to install these isn't going to be like taking a dam out. You're going to be 30 to 40 miles off the coast of Maine trying to uninstall a turbine when it's blowing 40 and 10 degrees out. It's not feasible. I spend my life out there. I'm out there 2,000 hours a year, on average. And it's just mind-blowing to me that they think something like this is going to last in the harshest environment in the world. And I mean, like I said, there's been failures other places. And they use the United Kingdom and Europe as kind of their platform to how this works. But the biggest difference over there to here is when the United Kingdom cited their offshore wind farms, they went to the fishermen and they said, where do we put these? Where's the best place? And the fishermen obviously didn't want them over there, but they were able to come up with areas, that were least impactful to them. It's been done completely opposite over here. They've come up with the areas and they've come to us and said, how's this work for you? And we've been like, it doesn't. And they've been like, well, it's coming. Figure it out.
Where did they do that? Talk to the fishermen first?
United Kingdom.
And I found the bill. It was in the 130th, 21,
All right, what year was that?
2021.
21.
And it was at the Energy Utilities and Technology Committee, and it didn't pass.
Right, yeah, I knew it didn't.
Yeah.
I knew it didn't
was
pass,
two.
unfortunately.
Yeah, it was to,
It made it to it never made it, it made it to the floor though, didn't it?
it was not to pass out of committee.
All right, all right.
Yeah, it was to prohibit any department or agency of the state or any political subdivision from permitting, approving, or otherwise authorizing an offshore wind energy development project.
Yeah, all right, that's what it was. Yeah, and then there was 18 or 1619, I think was the one the other one he tried where he was trying to prevent the cables from coming through state waters. You might remember that one as well.
That was a different year, right?
Yeah, it was. I think that was recently, within a year or two.
Yeah.
Matt, I'm Nancy West.
Nice.
Thanks for coming, and this has been eye-opening, which I think is important. You started out by saying the biggest threat was displacement, pollution, and habitat loss. What do you mean by displacement? Is that displacement of the fisheries?
Yeah, we won't be able to fish within these areas that they site the turbines, and we won't be able to fish where the cable routes are.
Okay, thanks.
And I mean, that's the biggest thing, or one of the biggest things, and they're all big. It's mind-blowing to us, like, I'm a lobsterman, but when we had a shrimp season, I would move my gear so the shrimpers could tow through the areas that they caught shrimp. When the herring boats come, I move my gear so the herring boats can catch their herring. And same with pogies. We all kind of work together and share the ocean. And all of a sudden you have this big wind coming in and buying it all up, saying this is ours, this is ours, this is ours. It's not the way it's ever been. I mean, that's why we created the Magnuson-Stevenson Act back in the 70s, was because the foreign boats were over here pillaging our resources and taking all the fish, and bringing it overseas and then shipping it back to us at a higher cost. And now we're doing the same thing, but with wind energy. I mean, we don't even have a boat in this country that can install the turbines. We're using foreign boats.
This is probably too big for today, but the issue with Canada and US and lobster is that, I don't know, this is big, so.
Whales.
This is big, and we kind of don't
Well, I
have
can't
room
answer
today.
it, but I'm
I'll
curious.
talk to you after about it.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay, I'm curious.
Oh, go ahead. No, go ahead.
I was just you just suggested that they ask the fishermen where to site the turbines. Where would you suggest that they be sited?
Head of the harbors.
Sorry?
Head of the harbors. Right at the beaches, on top of the ledges. The cables have to travel less distance then. It's cheaper, for them to site them. It's easier to maintain them because they're right there, But you know why they won't do that? Their first priority is view. That's number one to them. They do not want to be. That is more important to siting the turbines than anything else. Ruining somebody's view. I mean, they accuse the fishermen of NIMBYism, not in my backyard. Build them all right in my backyard. I'll give you all my 2.5 acres, and you can build turbines on it. I'd much rather see them be built there than out to sea. I mean, that's, like I said in the beginning, I'm not against it. There's a place for it and a time for it, but the Gulf of Maine is not the place or the time.
Matt, I really appreciate you coming in and telling us all this. I just wish we had more time today to spend discussing it, and I'd like to do this again with the committee when we could spend more time interacting with you again.
I can come in whenever.
And
I'm free in the afternoon.
It's just unfortunate. Unfortunately, today we have all these issues we had to finish, and I know you've waited 2 months to get here.
Oh, it's fine.
But
Can I ask a follow-up question?
Sure.
You mentioned that the action plan had been modified. Does it fit the picture that you would like to see better than what you saw the first time around?
It's better, but it's not perfect.
We did that to smooth it out.
Yeah.
Matt, just a second question. I just sort of more curious. You mentioned concerned about coming in Yarmouth is you figure is the likely prospect. When are they supposed to make a decision on that?
I'd love to know because I mean it's putting the cart before the horse. It's mind blowing. Like, how do you not know where you're gonna run the cable? You know what I mean? Like, we've been asking this since the beginning, and they can't give us an answer, and that's kind of the alarming thing. They don't have a cable route yet, but they know where the farm's going, the array's going, but they don't know where the cable's going. They're actually in the process. I just got an email. They're sending out the research vessel to start doing the sonar mapping of the bottom to start to figure out the cable route now. So, I mean, that's like, what happens if all of a sudden you put this array out there and you can't get the power to shore, It seems silly.
One more question. You mentioned about the different reports related to the electromagnetic field and the impacts on different species and the University of Rhode Island study. Is there any way you can share those with us?
Yeah, I can, I tried to print everything off, but I can,
Just
I
send
had,
it, you don't have to print, you just.
yeah, I'll send, that's what I was gonna say, I'll send you guys all an email, you know, of all the
That would-
studies
That
and,
would, that would be great, because then, a bunch of us are scientists on this committee, and it would be helpful for us to
Yeah.
review those things, because I was unaware of those studies.
Yep.
I would really like to look at them.
yeah, I have, I'm sure if I forward it to you, Mary Ann,
I'll
you can forward it to the
committee.
group?
Yeah, that'll be fine. I
Yeah,
can
perfect,
just
I'll get them all to
send it
Mary
back.
Ann here this week then.
There's quite a few studies that were done in the UK, and the US cites a number of those UK studies in their documentation because it was really the groundwork.
Yep.
Similar species, similar bathymetry, similar, cultural impacts as well. So I think the US has really used those, and I've read a number of the studies in the past couple of weeks, and found that, what Matt is saying is 100% represented by those studies, or not represented, I should say. Yeah, if you have other ones, I think that would be great for everybody.
Oh, yeah.
Some of them are probably a little bit over most people's head.
It's okay.
Not mine.
But, right, yeah, not everybody.
Tim's.
I don't know.
So, and my last point was going to be, and I think there is tremendous benefit that should be gained from the studies that have happened in Europe because of how long those turbines have been out.
Right.
And it is a very similar system. It's not identical, but it's similar, so there's a lot of applicability. But you also made the statement that there are no baselines or have been no baselines, and I'm wondering, where is that information from, or do you know of any baselines that are happening? Because I have heard that there are baseline studies occurring, but I don't know exactly where they are. I'm just wondering what information you have on that, because I do think it would be helpful to find out what else is maybe being done, and I imagine there isn't a great information network on this, so that's what I'm wondering.
Well, that was what that research array was supposed to be for originally. They were going to install that out there, and that's when they were going to create their baseline studies. They were going to monitor that area around the research array, look at the effects that it had on the different creatures in the ocean and stuff like that, and monitor that for, they told us originally, 5 to 10 years.
Yeah.
And that creates your baseline.
Yeah.
And like I said, the commercial leases are getting sold October 29th, and there's no research array, so there's no baseline.
Yeah.
One quick question. What, you were referring to BOEM?
Yes.
What is that?
Bureau of Ocean Energy Management. They're in charge of leasing the Outer Continental Shelf for oil, gas, and renewable energy. They were created after the Deepwater Horizon catastrophe.
Energy management?
Yes.
Bureau of
Bureau of Energy Management, yep. And they fall under the Department of the Interior.
Well,
I'm more of a windmill expert than a lobsterman here the last 5 years. That and a power generation expert.
I'm just going to make a general comment. It's just that I understand that it looks like and smells like it sometimes that organizations are taking money from wind, and therefore that's why they support them. But I would question that to be the case in many of them, only because I know a number of those organizations, and I know that's not what they're doing, but I do understand that it can look that way. And
Good.
therefore, more due diligence needs to be made to create a better atmosphere for dialogue as to why do certain organizations stand out in favor of this. And, and a big challenge that we all face, there are trade-offs with every decision.
Oh, yeah.
And the challenge is what are those trade-offs? And you raise really good points that there are significant trade-offs that may not being considered appropriately, and I think that's a really valid and reasonable approach, and I appreciate your bringing particularly to the plate that there are other, there is credible evidence that suggests there are these impacts, and where is the evidence that this is being considered? So I think that's a really valid
I think the biggest thing was the first thing I said, like, why are we putting these in if Bowen themselves acknowledges that they're not going to slow climate change?
Yeah, we can, it's a longer discussion. It's a relative magnitude thing. It's like, no single effort that any of us make will slow climate change. But in its collective, it is important.
They talk about it in the collective, and it will have a negligible impact when all the farms are produced.
So I was unaware that they stated that, and I'll be very interested. I want to go read that, because I'm surprised they made that statement. But very, very good of you to find it.
It was 672 pages of jargon.
Yeah.
There, and that was on page 66.
I don't doubt it.
Thank you, thank you.
Thanks, Matt, for bringing it to us.
I got nothing to do, so I'm gonna sit and watch your meeting. I'll shut my mic off
For the
now.
rest of the meeting. And so I did want to go past the date. October 29th is when they're talking about awarding these leases.
Yes, yes. Or, that's when the auction starts to happen.
Okay.
Yep, and the auction usually takes a few weeks to a month or so, and then after that, there's a whole process that has to be
Gotcha.
followed. But in about a month, the end of November, we should find out if anybody bid on them and if they were awarded.
How long are the leases? How long do they last?
Usually 20 to 30 years.
Thanks.
And they're renewable at that point, too.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Did you turn off your microphone? Did I just see you do that?
I'm done. I don't want to be recorded anymore.
You know how this works with committees?
One or two.
Okay. Well, it's hard to change
Yeah.
mindset right now. But a couple of things that we really have to get onto today. We have a couple of things facing us within the next 2 months. We need to think about a budget for next year. Part of the budgeting process, which will probably start the end of October, the beginning of November. For those who weren't directly involved over the last 2 years, we were able to start the SPIRA, the reserve account, and we went to the Budget Committee to get that on to be considered and supported by the Budget Committee. We've now received we are at the $100,000 mark. I think we probably should think about how we're going to handle when it goes below that 100,000 mark, how that's going to be replenished. And maybe and I don't have answers for any of these, I just think we should be thinking about, and how we might want to address that. The other idea that was brought out in our 2-year sustainability, our 2-year plan we just did was to talk about which I can never think of the terminology, to talk about a long-term climate, infrastructure plan.
A mitigation investment policy.
Thank you. I can never come up with the words when I want them.
I'm sorry, say that again.
Mitigation investment policy. It's on page 4 of this action plan.
Yeah. And that's to start thinking from a town perspective, and this would be working with the town administration to come up with a policy for the community to think about how you're going to handle big commercial capital projects as climate change becomes more intense.
And I will tell you, too, that the Harbor Waterfront Committee is discussing setting up a reserve account for things that are going all around us lately, based on our establishing the SPIRA account.
Really?
That they've seen that it works and that it's handy to have, and so even though Kevin made a face when we brought it up. There will probably be a request, a warrant on the annual meeting in March to establish such a fund for that committee. Now, whether we're gonna go, whatever dollar amount it is, I don't know. We haven't determined that, but I think it's gonna be something that's gonna be built on. So there's gonna be challenge for every one of these committees with a reserve fund to get funding for it every year. It's gonna increase the budget amount certainly, and taxes, the like, so that's something to be aware of. But I think we get in early and get one started, like in the harbor waterfront, like Spira. I think that the town benefits from it in the long run.
So it's almost sounding like we should begin a discussion with the committees and figure out how all of this could be melded into one. I can't imagine having these disparate reserve accounts
Well, I
coming
think
up.
My understanding of how the budget works, and that may be able to add to that, the fund is dedicated to a specific purpose.
That particular one is.
Yeah, but if you try to blend an amorphous fund for anybody in the town who needs money to go to, that might not pass muster.
Probably not, yeah.
So Mo, specifically, I think this, I was thinking when I attended the Harbor and Waterfront, I think last month, it was, I think, a discussion specifically more for the land acquisition to take advantage of, for example, if, I think the thing that prompted the whole discussion was Boatyard by Bethel Point Landing. If that ever came on the market, it's so crucial to at least minimum to turn around to use it. You know, it would be, you'd lose the value of the town's probably best landing.
But there are
And so
also
that was,
discussions about how do we pay for decomposing whales lying on our beaches? And that, there is no money for in the town. And Paul said, somebody jokingly said, just take it out offshore somewhere and put a Jersey barrier in it and sink it. You know, you can't do that, because he's been the last person that handled it, to make the town liable for something that goes wrong with that. So, I mean, so I just think that having a reserve fund set aside when we need it, instead of having to go to town meeting to get money after the fact, is a good idea.
Yeah.
And so I think other organizations in town, other committees are gonna pick up on that, because they see a sudden demand for money now that they didn't have planned on.
That's interesting, and I think from our perspective too, if we're talking about a long-term, which I keep forgetting the terminology for.
Mitigation and investment policy.
An investment policy, we need to think about maybe in the next month or so, having a group of us and put some feelers out to other committees who are thinking about this, to think this through as how that might be handled.
Sounds like the Harbor and Waterfront is thinking of it as a contingency fund.
Right.
So what are the other committees, like how does Town Lands Committee think about a contingency fund? And maybe that could be consolidated into a more general policy. But again, we have very specific reasons for the Spira Fund existing, and each of these committees would have very specific reasons.
I think that one, I think the idea, I think it came up, if I was, Mose, there's probably been more discussion since I was at the meeting I attended, but there was on the budget item that's been there for years, it's a very small dollar amount, I say 5 figures,
Yeah.
low five. There's like, called land acquisition fund. So I think the idea spurred it, saying, hey, why don't we, this fund already exists, maybe sort of reactivate adding to it, I think is how at least part I heard was what triggered the discussion.
And I think that particular concept of land acquisition is becoming more and more critical for access to the water by both commercial and recreational people, and I think it needs to be thoroughly considered.
It does make me think, the same as what you were saying, Mary Ann, about the universality, I don't know what word I want. Nancy will probably know.
That's,
But where there's overlap, to make sure, because though the reserve account passed, not everybody loved it.
No?
And our reserve account has been talked about, our reserve account has been talked about to finish projects or something that are related, but not necessarily like going after a grant.
Right.
So I would love to see how it all fits together.
Yeah, and, you know, when we think about, if we think about the pushback that we got at town meeting, and it was specifically because many townspeople do not want to have a fund there where large amounts can be spent without them having a sense of any control. I mean, which they should be.
Yeah.
So as we talk about this, I think it's worth talking a lot more about, actually.
Yeah.
And the land acquisition fund, that actually was started when we did the open space plan in 2005. That was one of the to-dos was to start a land acquisition fund to buy property. And it's sort of been there, and was used a little bit on Hildreth Road when there was property there that the town got for tax reasons. And now you've been looking at it from your committee about
For possible, park
Land acquisition.
enhancements for.
Yeah, right.
Beside, some landings.
which is good, actually. Who would be interested in maybe meeting and talking more about this with other committees, perhaps lands, town lands, and harbor and waterfront, to get a sense of how we might want to introduce the mitigation fund
You got it.
and get some sense of a direction that we might want to go.
Looking forward, there are two things that I remember about whatever section of this
Yes.
there is. One, and this is coming from Mark, I believe.
Yeah.
One, we have to make the assumption that there are going to be some things we do not do. We can't do it all. And I think the challenge to this committee from him was to begin to look at that. So that's one thing. And then the other that I'm thinking is, given what you were saying, Mose, from water and harborfront, whichever word comes first, is what are the anticipated long-term needs that we have across the board? And they're represented by committees, not necessarily all of them are, but in terms of addressing the resilience of the town, in terms of what we anticipate, in terms of what's going to happen to the ocean and the effects that we have on that we experience from that. So rather than how do we strategically model the fund, what are we needing to think about having money for?
Right.
And where are those priorities as we can see them now? So that's sort of number one. Number two, we have a comprehensive plan coming at some point in time. And maybe that whole exercise would be part of how we go forward after we accept a comprehensive plan in terms of that implementation. But sort of the broad long term is hard to do. And to me, the first step is, what do we anticipate we're going to have to do, and what's our vision? What do we need in the long run for water access under conditions of hurricanes or floods like we had and stuff like that? But that's a longer-term process than this budget, so I just throw that out. That's a different,
Right.
kind of a different take on it. And we don't really have good mechanisms, as I've experienced it in the town, to sit back and take that longer look, other than the comprehensive plan.
So
Yep.
I'm sort of hearing that we could start this process by bringing out things that need to be investigated more over the next, how many years, whatever, for the town in general to be is know those are going to be touch points. Those are going to be areas that get hit more and more and more, are going to need town resources.
Resources, yeah, that we can be pretty sure is going to be required. You know, never mind all the other infrastructure projects like a fire station and blah, blah, blah.
I know that we know about.
But I think that, you know, what do we think in 10, 15 years? And to me, the comp plan is giving broad strokes, but that would be one area maybe of implementation that this group and the committees related to this would maybe take some responsibility for. That just came into my mind. It may be a very bad idea. And Mary Ann's saying, oh, no, not anything more.
Jane, you're always very good at stepping back and thinking about what process are we going to use to move forward. And it seems to me this may be really naive, and I've been known to be naive, but it seems as if there are two entities in Harpswell that go across the board, besides the select board. One is the comprehensive plan, and that's a task-oriented committee. And this committee is the other one that has representation from all the various committees in town. And this will be an enduring committee. So it makes sense to me that if this committee, can begin to identify the problems in the next 10 to 15 years that will require funding, that would be a good first step. I agree with you about that. The other thing that Mark said, though, is that his suggestion is that we really focus on getting the map so that we can make these informed discussions about where the problems will lie. That Mark is concerned
flood
about the
map.
flood
Yeah.
map
Next
not
thing we'll
having
talk
the sea
about.
level rise. And so that underlies everything, all of these discussions for this committee and for the comprehensive plan as well. But we
Right.
will be the
Right.
enduring committee of memberships from all of the other town committees.
Related committees, yeah.
Yeah.
And that might be the 2025 budget project. I mean, I don't know if that's a priority or not, but that could be, that's what we're doing, yeah.
I'll catch you in a minute. And as I'm thinking, we sort of went in one direction here, but the other direction was going to be, we have a GoPIF grant coming up due in December. And what project might we think about, which gets into what Mark talked about and went in great detail about a study for what you are talking about. So I'll just step back for a minute. Tim?
Yeah, I saw the email exchange on that, and I thought it is worth revisiting the floodplain maps because, and I would be particularly interested in that process because my review of sea level rise in relationship to climate change, there are a variety of different ways in which this modeling is done, and what they often do and what most consultants do is they give you the 100-year average because it seems like, oh, that makes sense. But the problem is that average has been shifting and it's been increasing rapidly. And what's really shocking is the 10-year average, the last 10 years. So I don't know what went into the past plans, but my guess is it's not the most recent information. And it can be as much as doubling what is in the previous plans, and that can really be something to catch us off guard. And what I am also unclear about, but I was intrigued, is that there also are new models that interrelate storm surge probabilities and other aspects other than just simply sea level rise and how they combine together. And, you know, the science behind all of this stuff is changing fairly rapidly. And it does make sense to revisit it occasionally just to make sure we have the latest information. So I thought that in the context of something this committee should be interested in, that definitely rose to the level of something I thought we should be paying attention to.
It makes me think maybe we got to go back and look at that Garrison Cove analysis that, whatever Barney Baker's company's name was, prepared using storm surge and sea level rise based on a chart that he had. Now, I don't know if that's a 100-year average kind of thing or not, but in this last hurricane down in Florida, they had a 10-foot-high storm surge wave, wiped out a whole town, 500 people.
Yep.
And I don't suspect that they anticipated anything that large, that high. It's like a tsunami wave almost. And so I wonder if that analysis that Barney did for Garrison Cove is based on numbers that are really out of date now completely, and it's still under anticipated in the proposal that he made for us.
Well, on the other hand, too, the state has been talking about doing the same process that Mark outlined in his email. Everybody, I think all engineers have been using the maps we have, and the FEMA maps are based on history rather than, so I had heard the state was going to work on some type of the same situation that Mark outlined, but we would have the opportunity to get started now. If Ransom could do that, and we could get funding to do that, if the state does it, and if they're not, and I think part of what Mark said, if they're not doing it already, if they're not doing it and they're just thinking about it, it will take years before they complete that. Am I talking out of turn, Matt?
No, we will be changing the floodplain maps.
Right.
We just had a planning board workshop to kind of do a preliminary look at what the planning board would like to see go into those changes. But it's essentially a requirement for us to commit to some sort of update to the floodplain map.
Yeah.
And there are many, many little details that we could put in that aren't really represented in the current floodplain maps. So as this process goes on, we'll be soliciting information from different committees and townspeople. And we just heard back, I think today or yesterday, from Judy Colby-George, who does a lot of our GIS mapping. She's back from a small leave, and we're going to get started on doing some preliminary example maps based on what we think might be added or subtracted from the GIS data.
It would be interesting to find out from her what mapping, what resources she's going to be using, because my understanding from what Mark said and what I heard is she's only going to be able to use what is there now. And right now, the type of information we're talking about isn't there. It needs to be designed, has to be done.
Yeah, and that will significantly increase the cost and labor of doing the project. But, it depends on how we, as a town, pull that data together, or if we even can do that.
Right.
There will be some things, our initial kind of idea, just going off of the new state policies on how to identify resource protection zones. A lot of that was going to be done essentially by hand, going through on a property by property basis. So in areas where there's other special geographic features or issues, it might be something that's done by hand, or it might be something that we can find the data for and input directly into a GIS program.
So is the process that each town does the map? That can't be.
I'm sorry?
How do you get the flood maps? I mean,
Well, the flood maps are there, and we have sea level rise maps that we're modeling. I think what we're looking to do is have those combined.
but it's each town doing that independently, or is this a state project, or both?
Both.
Okay.
With the longest shoreline, we have a very particular need to really understand
Right.
in a fine-tuned way what we need and what the
Yeah.
potential impacts are. And I would hate to see the planning board be doing one process and this committee be doing another. So
Yeah.
sorting out
Yep.
one that will serve all purposes and pay for it and get it done, I think would be important.
And get the public input.
Oh, I didn't turn it on, I'm sorry.
That's,
I thought I did.
And just on that, I don't know how best to do this, but I imagine there are researchers in Maine, I'm just trying to keep it within the state, that are working on these issues. And one of the key components here is that our knowledge and understanding is really rapidly changing, even from Hurricane Helene,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So the record storm surge ever in Tampa Bay occurred in that storm,
Yeah.
and it never got closer than 200 miles from Tampa Bay. So this also shocked people. It's like it wasn't, they were aware of it, but there are other interesting things happening, and a major change for all the rainfall estimates, is that there is no doubt that hurricanes and tropical storms are going slower. And that is a function of climate change. So, and this is something that literally 10 years ago was never put into any models. And now it's like common knowledge that this thing that they thought might happen is absolutely happening, which is why we saw record floods over the last few days, since that's exactly what's going on. So it's a challenge because all of this information is changing so rapidly, and that's why I say it might be worth trying to find out which research institutions in Maine are working on this, because then potentially the town could say, we're very keen on this, we have this going on, and maybe there's some way we could build some pro bono help here. And I'll ask around a little bit. I don't know who is doing this, but I just figure there's got to be somebody.
well, I think what I'd like to do, because Mark mentioned Ransom Engineering, who is familiar with Maine, is a Maine company, would be a good company to pull this information that we're talking about together. Like I said, I know the state is starting the process, because Pete Slavinsky talked about it at a talk about 2 months ago. I think Mark's thought was, and I'd like to reach out to Ransom, actually, and put this forth to them and see if it's something that they would take on as a project with the detail that Mark gave us and what the cost would be.
Is this what Mark sent today?
A couple days ago.
Yesterday, or 2
Yeah.
days ago.
Yeah. He pretty much wrote out the whole project. If that sounds good to everybody. Nancy?
I think that makes sense, and I think some of the rationale behind this kernel of a grant idea, a grant application idea, is that we have town committees who are thinking about how we're going to be funding specific projects in their realm, like harbor and waterfront and lands and so on, and we're also thinking about how we set up this mitigation investment policy, and all of those decisions must be based on information that is as accurate as it can be. We can't say Garrison Cove is going to need a project that costs X hundreds of thousands of dollars when it could cost X millions of dollars, or vice versa. We've got to have the data. So the rationale for this is, in order for us to be doing this long-term planning in a big way and in a granular way, committee by committee, we need to have the data.
And I think another thing that, if Deirdre was here, and she'd be talking about, was the concentration the Conservation Commission has had on roads. Every project that we've done and done studies on have been at water crossings. We don't know, and we learned on Bethel Point Road, that people along the road got flooded. And this type of a study would go a long way for us to start to predict where we might be having problems with roads themselves, and not just at culverts or at harbor areas.
Yeah, I think that's also a community science, a community observation project.
As well, and they could go together.
Yep. And I think the community observation project would be a good, strong selling point that we already have it underway. Even though I will say that the Dingley Island Bridge picture post facing north now has a giant pumpkin on it.
Oh, well, that's because of the time of the year.
No one's bashed it?
No, not yet. We are very well behaved in this part of town.
Or
So Mary Ann, is the next step that this could be, and Mark is saying this too, this could be a GoPIF grant
Yeah.
application? Yeah. Sounds good.
So I'm gonna say, I'd like to follow through on that and see what we come up with. And then I kind of wanted, and
Marianne, what's the name of the company again?
Ransom Engineering,
Ransom Engine.
without an E.
Yes, okay, got it. Great name.
Now, one of the other, and so that would take care of two of them, that would take care of the first item on the new community action plan. Ba, 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 ba.
And prepare us with respect to the mitigation investment policy in a general way.
In a general way, yeah. And the other item I did want to bring up was, we've talked about this outreach. And it really was on our last plan, and we really started it. And I think perhaps we don't need to think about funding right that, but we need to put more concentration on how to do that. There was another, talking about money. I had been working with the Marine Resources Committee about a study by FB Environmental that was to study the waters around Bombazine Island. And I talked to Paul today because FB Environment wanted to know if we were applying for a GoPIF grant for that, because we can't go for two, you know. But I talked to him briefly about a community cohort. And if Brunswick and West Bath might be interested in what we're doing there, that might be something that could be pulled together for December as well. And he's going to get back to me. And that was just, I did want to bring that up because I've been talking with Marine Resources about this for almost 6 months. And so, yeah.
What's the purpose of the study? What are they looking at? Was I not supposed to ask that question?
My mind right now, I
Okay.
can't come up with the right words.
Sorry.
Basically, it's the water flow regarding the resources and,
The current, like, where settlement data, basically, where stuff's settling? Is that what
yeah,
they're looking at?
something like that, yeah.
Because are they doing it around Bombazine because of the aquaculture lease? Is that why they want to do it in that area
That
that's
started
pending?
it, but I think they also want to do it on Quahog Bay as well,
Yep, makes sense.
yeah.
That would be interesting, especially there at Bombazine, because you have the current coming under the Gurnett Bridge, and then you have the current coming out of the New Meadows, and everything kind of meets right there.
So is it to look at sedimentation as a result of the
I think it's-
currents?
Oh, I think it's more to look at, like,
Sustainability.
I can't speak much to, like,
Okay.
clamming and stuff like that. I don't know much about it at all. But I think it's, if I understand it, the seed from the clams and the quahogs goes up to the top of the surface, and they're trying to figure out, that's a big quahog bed, I believe, or clam bed right there, and they're trying to determine where all that seed is going when it's released. Because there's a pending lease for an oyster farm right there, and they're nervous that the oyster farm, oysters take up 50 gallons of water a day, and
That
they're,
they'll just eat the quahog seed?
right, that's what they're trying to find out, is how much seed might disappear.
And I think it sort of falls in kind of on the edges of the aquaculture committee insofar trying to figure out flows and sharing all the resources there. And I think it could become, it can be couched in the form of a sustainability type grant. So we'll just see how that turns out.
I don't know, somewhere in here.
I'm so much off this agenda today, I have no idea where I'm at.
Sorry, I've lost track of which part of the agenda we're on.
I am
Trying
too,
to
because
figure
I'm
that out
bouncing around.
quietly here,
I'm
and I
looking at the
didn't figure
time.
that out.
I'm looking at the time, can't find my notes, so just,
All right, I got some notes, but
okay.
we're not sure they're going to go in the right place, though.
Yeah.
Okay.
Marion, can I just comment that, back to what we were talking about a little bit ago,
Right,
MCOG, it's regional, of course.
yes.
But they're looking at a lot of the same things that we're talking about and putting together
The cohort,
composite.
yeah.
So I think that's in the works and would be, I think might be helpful to share here or where, everywhere, because it's all mid-coast region, Brunswick, Harpswell, and up. So,
Actually, I was going to ask you if MCOG could perhaps, if this cohort idea came together,
yeah,
if they could be the sponsor of that.
I would think so. And it's a big, you're talking about a GoPIF grant to a cohort to apply, so it'd be a more 125,000,
I think that's what it is,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, worth asking. That's what they do.
So let me find out from, Paul's going to get back to me,
Okay.
and then and we could put together a rough outline of the project, and then go to MEMCOG and see if they would be the sponsor.
Yeah. Yeah. Sounds good.
Okay. So in general, we laid out our plan in the new community action when we had priorities. And for today, it's already 5:30, we need to start thinking about, and I think as I think about, we got so much going on, it will be good to start having some working groups do some things off meetings.
Related to the plan. I understood.
And we have, one area, of course, is the outreach.
Storm surgeon, that-
And I believe Peter and Nancy and Jenny Zagarello are interested in talking more about how we can get information out. What I see is a problem with getting all this done on in the time frame, And so maybe we could talk about, come up with a time to come up with a kind of a very loose plan of what you'd like to talk about, and then be able to come back at the next meeting, and kind of a plan of action coming up.
I think we have Abby talk about sustainability cafe and.
Yeah, that's what I was just thinking. Would
Really?
that be
Yeah.
a way to develop outreach? get
And that would be
people-
good outreach
Get people
with,
interested in various topics that they hadn't thought about from a question they asked.
Yeah.
And then,
If you want to hang in on one of our committees, yeah.
What,
Be here at the next meeting, so.
what are the guidelines for working groups? Is
We
it
cannot have more than,
3?
we cannot have a quorum.
Okay.
So for this committee, 4.
So four people could meet informally
Yes.
without having to make it a public meeting? Is
Yes,
that
but we
correct?
probably should spend some time and schedule it.
Okay.
I'm not sure about that, because I've always heard that 3 people exchanging emails constituted a meeting.
I think it's a quorum. In most,
Yeah,
isn't it a
depends how
quorum?
big the group-
Well, it's 3 meals, 3 for the select, 2 for a select, make a quorum.
Yeah. Well, when on the Mitchell Field Committee, people started broadcasting emails.
I think emails are
You can't
different.
have 3 or more, 3 is the max before it
For an
becomes a
e-meeting,
meeting.
a meal.
So we have 9 people on that committee now, so we don't have a quorum at 3, we wouldn't have a quorum at 4.
Five would be a quorum, yeah.
Quorum, 5 would be the quorum.
But I think it's different, the rule's different for emails versus people sitting down to have a discussion.
Discussion.
As a subcommittee.
Yeah, I think so.
I don't
Pretty
know.
sure.
When we did the Mitchell Field update of the master plan, we weren't sure we were going to be a task force, a working group, or a subcommittee.
I think what the town likes to know, if you're doing this, they want to be able to put it on the calendar. So that if somebody wants to come, they can.
Okay.
So I think we'll lay out the guidelines on this, but my sense is for now, make your date enough ahead
That it can be put on the calendar.
so that it can be put on the calendar
Okay,
and
And then
probably,
the public can attend.
if they want,
Right.
yeah,
okay.
We're not going to make them.
yeah. That also then it says, where do you want to meet? And if you know that you could have the public coming, you may or may not want to meet in your house.
I think you need to make the meeting in the town office.
You
That's
can
right.
make it a town land, we do that.
Or a town landing,
Yeah.
Have a
Be on-
picnic.
have a
be on
picnic.
big table in the cliff trail.
That's right,
Okay.
that's right.
All right, so it has to be official. I wanted to know what the boundaries about what being official are.
Sort of, that's what they sort of are.
Okay.
It's a very loose boundary, isn't it? So that was for the outreach. We need to talk more about Spira and how we want to handle town lands and harbor and waterfront and talk about, I think it would be good to be part of the conversation as Jane presented it on some of the guidelines we want to start thinking about. But we also have to consider, I believe, I'm not sure, we have a lot of projects that are outstanding right now, that the money is still in Spira, but it's going to have to be spent.
To some degree.
Yeah,
Some unknown amount.
it's unknown, because we had, how much when we went for that last grant that we didn't get? 70,
I thought we had at least that.
yeah, it's like 70,000.
And then I think weren't there some HVAC and stuff that could potentially use some of it?
Could be
that was-
potentially used. So we're going to need to, before budgetary time, unless we can figure out how to factor it and say it, we have to figure out, we want to always have 100,000
Why?
for the next projects, for the same reasons.
But I'm just thinking how much you've actually spent out of that as matches. And do we need to keep it at 100 year after year and replenish? Yeah, I can understand replenishing it, but does it always have to go back to 100?
You thinking
Originally,
it should,
was 100 proposed, we got 60 the first year, and we spent 10 or 15, I can't remember
Right.
now. And then 40 last year to bring us back, 50 last year to bring us back to the even 100. But I think if every committee starts talking about a reserve fund and $100,000, there'll be a lot of pushback. Now, if we use 50 or 60 of it in one given year, then yes, it should be replenished generously. But just to keep it at 100 because it's an even number, I don't know if that really is going to fly, or if it needs
it's an
to.
interesting point. I guess it behooves us to know what we've spent so far.
Yeah, I think we need to know two things: how much we've actually laid out and how much we've gotten back for it. And I thought we were developing that, you and Mary Ann, from your spreadsheet.
Yeah, that's what
And I
I,
think
Jane and I
that's
have to
something that
talk
needs
about.
to be publicly made known, is not
Right.
to say, we got a great return, give us some dollars
Right.
and percentages.
We're
Tim, or-
planning to meet about that.
Okay.
So I thought one of the reasons we wanted $100,000 was for the opportunity that if we needed money to be provided as match, that we would have it.
That was part of it also, but then we sort of focused more on matching money for grants,
Well,
which are generally 5 to 10% of the total, except in the ship fund thing for Mitchell Field, but that's a different story.
I think you're saying the same thing.
Yeah.
yeah,
And I'm not opposed to having
But I think what
money added
what
every
Moses is
month or every
suggesting
year,
is that if we don't you know, if the majority of grants that we go for don't require having $100,000, then is it necessary
Yeah.
to go back up to 100? If we're only needing 5 or 10 or 20 or 30, what's a history of our use? And then that, you know, and so there's one way to look at what's the history of our use, and the other thing is to look at it and say, well, what really are the opportunities out there? If there are other grants that we haven't gone after that have a higher match, then we would want that opportunity. But at
And
this
there's-
point, we grabbed a number, we got it. We kind of feel safe when we're going back to it, which is what Mary Ann's saying, but perhaps it's not necessary if
I
we
mean, there's
look
a
at.
disaster aspect of it too, but I have understood that the town has a pretty generous reserve fund for that kind of money right now, that 100,000 from our committee reserve wouldn't be necessary.
Now, I can say we applied for, Ketchum and High, we applied for the construction grant for the 2 landings, which had a much higher,
Yeah,
and I don't remember the figure offhand, it wasn't like 70,
yeah, 50 or 70 or.
70?
The amount we were asking for?
No, the amount that we were going to pay.
Well, we were gonna put in 5%. I think we're asking for a total of 1.2 million.
Yeah, and we were putting in over 70,000, I think, as I recall.
So that would speak to having a bigger fund.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
There's bigger expenses. I mean, that's,
Yeah.
if we're,
So that's got to be all part of the conversation, I think, as we talk about this, so we can be, and it also going to go into the thinking about the mitigation fund.
There's also a $50,000 limit the select board can offer.
That's right, thank you,
Because 70,000 would have to go to special town meeting or something.
that's right.
But the 50,000 is,
Select board can say, okay.
Yeah,
and isn't the Spira fund set up so that there's a much smaller number than that the select board has to approve expenses,
no, the
expending?
Spirit is the 50,000.
Oh, okay.
yeah.
I was
Although
going
they
to say
prove
that,
everything we use it for.
I'm sorry?
They have to approve everything that we use it for. The smaller amounts, they approve.
Okay. But it sort of sounds like that there's an idea of other committees having a similar sort of reserve fund, and I just wonder whether, at the risk of making everything more complicated, if there should be one reserve fund, because the numbers could be smaller overall and still provide for these things. And, you know, the problem that it's supposed to solve is things that can't wait for a town meeting,
Right.
right? And so, you know, if we know that there's $1.2 million coming up and we're gonna have to put in 5%, I think we have time to do that. The problem is when these GOPIF things are announced and we don't have a town meeting between now and the deadline. So we have to have some way of doing that. So I think that keep it in focus, that it's for, you know, flexibility and, you know, so just to avoid the problem of taking as much as 18 months to get around to getting something that's only available for 2 months.
Right,
Yeah, those were the 2 criteria, to matching and to be nimble.
yeah. Yeah,
But if other committees are going to consider the same sort of thing, I think it might be worth seeing if there's a way to make it one fund that's being shared, just because that could keep the numbers more reasonable, at the risk of making everything more complicated. Like, wait, we had our eye on that money.
Well, I think I mean, that was my point too. I think it more acceptable to the taxpayers. But when you talk about the harbor and waterways or landing, and you're talking about land acquisition, that's a whole different animal to me.
that's true, yeah.
So if that's what it's for, that's different.
Well, it
It's
wasn't
not a
just-
reserve account.
It wasn't
it's
just
land
for that, that was
acquisition.
a major component of the discussion. But the other thing with it, Paul kept bringing up, that we don't have any budget for all this stuff that happens overnight and can't plan on it.
Like whales.
Whales, sharks, and it is likely to become more often occurring because of the migration of the animals now with the warming waters.
Would that be a town budget rather than a committee-related budget?
the magnitude, I was wondering the same thing. I was going to talk to you afterwards now about how big a cost is anticipated, and it could be in the harbor master's budget as a contingency cost for unforeseen whales.
Yeah. I mean, nobody seems to
Seals,
know
okay.
what caused that whale
Yeah, they're
or
less than 10
shark
feet.
to die.
That's the kind
Sort of shorefront cleanup.
Yeah, yep. But then you're gonna have people coming by and wanting us to take that floating wharf that drifted down from the last storm away, and that's another issue.
Yeah.
The boats.
Yep,
Yeah, so maybe it needs to be a budget line.
Yep.
In the harbor master's budget, that either gets spent or doesn't get spent.
Those are all interesting considerations. So,
Just one point about the current GoPIF grant. If it's, you'll know the wording, but if it's from their plan, there's no match. But if it's not, you could still get it, but it would be a match.
right,
Remember that?
yeah,
So,
yeah.
depends where it fits.
We've so far chosen things that are in part of their plan. We've been able to tailor them to this 24 priorities that they had.
Yeah.
So, okay. So, I completely lost track of this whole meeting today. So for today, we're getting near closing time here. We've talked about the items that here it is, here. We talked about the items that we wanted to focus on, which was the roads, the
Dead whales.
dead whales, our Spira fund. Now, we came to some fairly good conclusions, but we didn't finish them per se. We're gonna need more we're gonna need more discussion on these things. And my concern is, we only meet once a month. And by the next time we meet, it's going to be November.
well into budget season.
Well into budget season. So, we can do a couple of things. I'm not sure how many of you want to be part of this conversation. We could schedule another meeting, or we could choose some groups. We have a group now with Nancy and her cohorts that will meet on their own to come up with some plans for how we're going to progress for the next year in that area. Not particularly budget constrained. And what was the other one? The other one was, well, we have to finish that level 2 energy audit in town, don't we? And where are we on that project?
The level 2 energy audit was done. There's a list of projects.
Yeah, we got to complete the projects.
Right, and I think, 2 people from the Energy Committee were supposed to meet with Tim Clark and
Right.
talk about progress on it and keep
Okay.
it, keep it from getting derailed. The other part of that is the HVAC improvements, but that's,
They were here today, I think. weren't
That's
they?
been awarded apparently.
right.
Yeah, it's awarded. And they were working today, I was told.
Yeah, they were here early this morning.
Yeah. So are you in a pretty good position there that can flow along with input,
Which,
to finish the office energy improvements?
we made a list of from the recommendations of not only which ones we recommended, which was all but maybe one of them,
Right.
but then grouped them and handed that off to the town to put it out for, to find contractors to do it,
Okay.
whether it's up for bid or small enough to just find someone to do it. And that's what John and David were supposed to meet with Tim about.
So that's that's in process?
Right.
Okay. So I guess what I'm trying to get to, can we sort of just feel that is in process? We don't have to do anything proactively right now on that?
I believe that's the case.
Okay. So I'm just going down the list here, the 5 items we had as our top priorities, and we've covered 4. The other was explore a town solar array, which was something in the future.
So, in fact, I think next week we'll talk about putting something in the budget to hire a consultant to help us
Good.
nail that down, because it's really squishy, and it's really, it changes all the time.
Right.
So I think it's time to get somebody to, get us focused on what the right direction would be, because
Good. So that sounds like that would be a budget item for next year.
that's what we're gonna talk about next week.
Sounds good.
Trying to put
Okay.
together a budget item for the Energy Committee to hire a consultant.
So if of the 4 of the 5 items that we put in are our most important community actions, it sounds like we have them in process. And other than what we've talked about, that should be all we have to think about for the next few months. And the last one, which was consider energy offsets improvements of other town buildings, we're talking about the next two years. So that's something that's out in the future, I think, for the Energy Committee as they progress on what they're working on. So, well, I'm feeling better. So, that being said, do we have people that want to meet regarding this, or do you want to just have another meeting to talk about this budget more within the next couple of weeks?
You're basically saying maybe have a working group on the.
Or a working group?
For the, I'm happy to participate if we want to have do the working group.
Okay.
Get it.
Look at me.
No, I'm
think
just, I'm
Mose.
just,
You
I'm
should
just
look
looking
at
out.
Mose.
I'm
Mose
just,
is
I'm
hard
looking
work.
at Mose. Mose is putting his stuff together because he's getting ready to leave.
I'm always ready to leave a meeting.
I know. So do you want to sign up for another one?
Not particularly.
Okay.
Nancy, do you have me on the outreach? Because I think I'm,
Yeah, she should be on there.
You are now. You were on it.
Okay.
which relieves me of budget.
Well, I'm interested in this.
Oh, okay.
Okay, we got 2 people. Is there anybody else that's interested in having a working group to talk about Spira and how we want to progress with thinking about other committees? Is there anybody on Harbor and Waterfront, maybe Matt, that would be interested, you think?
I'm tapped.
Billy, I know, and I think Billy is one, I mean, when I was the meeting I attended, he was pretty,
Tapped?
Yeah.
Or
no,
ready?
no, he was very supportive idea, I'm
Yeah,
sure
I
he's
think, I think
busy time
the
for it.
general
but-
sense of the committee was that they want to move forward with it. We just need to talk about dollars.
Okay.
And how to present it,
Yeah,
probably.
yeah.
So would Billy be interested in meeting with Ken and I and another person if they want to just get a sense how we might combine the thinking on this or how we want to proceed with this reserve idea?
I don't know, we're going to meet next Wednesday for this month's meeting, I believe. That's the second Wednesday.
That's right, at
So-
5 o'clock.
So we can talk about it at the committee meeting, and I can get back to you on what the Harbor Waterfront people decide or think about the thing.
But I'd like to have I'd like to have a discussion between someone from Harbor and Waterfront and Lands and our committee to kind of pull this, mesh it together instead of coming from different,
Instead of competing.
yeah.
Oh, yeah, we don't want to compete, and that's for sure. All right, you set it up, and I'll sit down and talk with you.
Yay.
Oh, you're a good guy.
The question of how much of it's land acquisition, because
Yep.
that's a fund that's already
That's-
In
existing.
place,
so
yeah.
need to be
And that's
increased.
Yeah.
part of the discussion was that fund is so minuscule,
Yeah.
you couldn't even buy a driveway for it, let alone parking space.
But that crosses
So that's-
over with town
yeah.
lands in
Yeah.
terms of parking
Yep.
and stuff like that.
And Paul has put together a proposed ordinance as opposed to a policy on parking based on what Brunswick has done, which would give us some guidelines on how to manage the properties that are acquired if we ever get there. And I think that will come to you guys, maybe after our next meeting, if we talk about it some more. But I think it's a sensible thing to do. That's the offshoot of that little informal group that Paul and Hope Hilton and I were part of on parking issues in town, on town lands. So that's where that's going now.
Now, do you think, the more I'm listening to this, do you think that your committee is more thinking about a budget item and how to handle land acquisition?
Well, the land acquisition piece comes up because of the need for parking and access.
So that's one
So-
area, yeah.
If we're gonna have a workable fund, seems to me we gotta have some big bucks in it.
Okay,
But at the same time, there's no immediacy to use it because it's one of those things that can happen today or not for another year and
That's true.
somebody's land is available. One of the things that we're gonna have to consider is, can we go to landowners proactively and ask them if they'd be willing to lease some of their frontage property for parking? And I think, did somebody say that they'd already talked to somebody about that somewhere? And were turned down?
Yeah.
Was that on Bethel Point or is it down at Graveyard?
I thought it was, they talked about possibility.
Potts Point, I think there was in Butter.
Yes, yes, it
yeah, there was, yeah.
Everybody's been encroaching on the land just informally
that was done-
anyway.
Right.
But
That
they
was
didn't
done
wanna
through
lease
the-
it and they didn't wanna sell it.
It was done through the land trust a number of years ago, and they did a lot of investigating, then the owner turned it down. So I guess what I'm trying to figure out is, we're talking about a reserve account. I'm trying to figure out if we should be having a combined discussion with the other committees about a reserve account, or do you think you've got a focus of how you want to handle land acquisition and things like dead whales?
Well, the land, they're both of them are issues of opportunity that you can't anticipate. You can plan to be able to deal with it at the time, but it maybe the magnitude will be so great you couldn't do anything with it, even with the money you have on hand. So it's a crapshoot sort of thing, but I think a proactive plan to look for land to acquire should be undertaken. And one of the things about the whale and the shark, where that there's only one place that anybody knows about where we could take the carcass.
Yeah,
And
they got a
that's-
lot this
That's
year.
the kind of thing where that whole business could fold up anytime. I don't know anything about it, except that they take decomposing carcasses and use them for fertilizer.
All right,
But I'd say, talking about, getting back to the budget, my gut sort of feels to me that it probably makes sense to keep them separate, but I think a discussion would be useful to strategize, one, how you're not competing, and how you present them as the have pretty different goals. And I think the Spear is a little bit more of an ongoing, take advantage of grants, whereas land acquisition would be something that would continue to grow more, taking probably a longer term. But I think a discussion of how to present probably budget advisory, as well as if it gets to town meeting, I think some explanation, I think that's where you probably value in having a discussion.
Well, I've had the sense all along that from what Mark has said at different meetings, that you really have to be specific about what you're gonna use the money
yeah.
for to take it to town meeting. And if you put it all into just a common grab bag, that's not specific enough to get voters to agree to it, especially if it affects their taxes.
okay.
So as the note taker, do we agree that the working group that's composed of Mose, Marianne, and Ken is currently meeting and talking about this issue?
We are right this minute.
Right, it's that way, doesn't it?
I think from the very outset, it shouldn't be called a reserve account, because you're talking about land acquisition.
So let's keep it separate.
Well,
Yeah.
if land acquisition is very different than what the
Definitely, no,
SPEAR
it's true,
account
that's
is
true.
for. And I think the whales and things should, I mean, you won't know
That's
how
almost an
much, but
ongoing
it's a
budget thing in my
item.
mind.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's the request from the select board, or the budget advisory.
So going forward here,
I gotta go, guys. I'm
go
sorry,
ahead,
but-
yeah, no, that's all right.
Thanks.
Going forward, I'm hearing that Harbor and Waterfront has their issues, and Lands has their issues.
Right.
They
Just to be
have-
clear,
they have-
Lands is not officially asking for a budget item.
I know.
think we would support it, Harbor and Waterfront adding to that, but there's
Yeah.
not something right now,
Okay.
town lands is not.
So for our purposes, in a reserve account, I suggest that I pull together the amount that we have in there currently, how we've used it, by amounts, and then discuss whether we need to even go to the Budget Advisory Committee for any additional money. And maybe we can just put it on the back burner this year.
Also, how much is anticipated to be spent?
Yeah.
Like the HVAC.
Well, see, and that's the other thing, because that's built into the reserve account.
Yeah, right. It's an appropriate use, it's just,
So what I need to find out, I can never get an amount from administration because they haven't spent it yet, to know whether there's enough in their reserve account, not reserve account, their operating allotment. And that's kind of the unknown.
But you can put in a maximum draw on the SPIRA account.
Probably,
Okay.
yeah.
And then if we are applying for these GOPIF grants,
Right.
there's, for the $75,000 one, what would be the maximum match we might need if we don't fit within the category that gives us a pass on that?
I think it was 10%.
10%,
Okay, so that's $7,500.
yeah. What we've done in
See
the
where I'm
past
going?
is we've always put money in whether we had to or not,
Okay,
just because it
To help our odds.
helped our odds.
okay.
And it's been 10%, 10%.
And then-
$10,000, I'm sorry, it was $10,000.
Okay, well, so that's a projection to consider.
Yeah, yeah.
And then if there's this collaborative one, whatever, we would have to ante up with, for this, if there's this collaborative MCOG, Bath, Brunswick, Harpswell.
We don't know what that would be.
Okay.
Now, would that one be instead of the town one, or you can do both?
No, I think we're keen on going for the
The mapping one.
the mapping one. The other one is kind of out there, and it's going to depend
But the town can participate in two of those grant applications?
at the same time.
Okay.
This time they can, and the last
I was
time they
gonna say, in
couldn't.
the past, that was
No, they
not
haven't,
true.
but this one said you could.
They do like cohort regional
Yeah,
things a
right.
lot.
And we have experience with that.
Yes. So, that being said, that's my to-do.
Okay.
And I will then send that out. And we'll probably be, if necessary, and we feel we have to talk about it more, I'll call a special meeting before the Budget Advisory Committee. I'm not sure when we're going to have to go to them with that. Sound good?
Sounds good. Second.
Okay. All that being said, it's 6 o'clock, and I think we will adjourn.
I have one question.
Certainly.
On here, you say that the meeting in December is on the 10th?
Is that what I said?
That's the second Tuesday, not the first.
How about that? Why did I put that down? I don't know.
So it's on the 3rd?
Probably because I was looking at the wrong month when I picked it. I was probably looking at November when, well, that didn't make sense. I don't know why I put the 10th.
Okay. So it's actually the 3rd.
It would be the 3rd. I'm sorry about that.
I put that there.
What fun.
Okay,
Yep.
We'll see how these notes come out.
December
It's
3rd.
a bit of a wandering.
We adjourned, or?
we are adjourned at 6 o'clock.